This is Chapters 9 and 10 of Learning Web Design, which wrap up the HTML portion of the book. Chapter 9 surveys the basic elements needed to create HTML forms, with special attention given to new kinds of form elements that were added in HTML5. Before the days of JavaScript and Flash, HTML forms were pretty much the only way to add interactivity to a website. A form was a place to collect data from the user and then submit it to the server for processing. The server responded with either an error code or the next page to display to the user. Today, HTML forms are a lot more powerful, and the ways that we can use them are pretty numerous. Instead of surveying all the uses for web forms, here we'll just survey the HTML elements needed to create valid HTML forms. Finally, as always, watching this video does not substitute for reading the chapters and doing the exercises. You'll be expected to write an HTML form from scratch on the next quiz. The most fundamental element surveyed is the form element itself. A form element is a container for form controls, or as we sometimes call them, form widgets or form fields. The form tag has existed almost from the beginning of the web and has remained pretty much unchanged ever since. It has always had two required attributes, the form action and the form method. We'll start with these and then describe some of the commonly used form controls. The action attribute tells the web browser where to send the data after it's been submitted. Usually the destination is some sort of program or script on the web server, but not always. It is possible for the action to point back to the current page for handling by JavaScript, or even to send the form data directly to an email address. The method attribute tells the browser what HTTP command to issue to the server when submitting the data. There are two possibilities. Setting method equals get will cause the form data to be appended to the end of the action URL. This is how your queries are usually submitted to a search engine. The effect is to make the search itself bookmarkable, which is pretty handy if you repeat the same search over and over again. The alternative is to set method to post, which then sends the data in two HTTP requests. One to initiate a connection to the server and another to send the data itself. This is how data uploads that are too big to fit inside a URL work. It's also handy for encrypted uploads and those that are very rare times when you really do want to send data straight to email. As you may recall, we actually saw the get method in action in the Chapter 2 video. Get and post are just a couple of the standard HTTP commands. Just for fun, here is a snippet from the standard Google search form we all know and love. From the action attribute, we see that the form sends the search query to a program called search, located on a server back at Google. From the method attribute, we see that the get command is being used so that the search can be bookmarked. There are a few other attributes in there as well, mostly for use by JavaScript and assistive devices. Inside the form is a whole bunch of hidden controls with information about you. There is also an input text box for the query itself. Since there is only one visible control, there is no need for a submit button. JavaScript is used to automatically submit the form whenever the user types the return key. Actually, that's not quite true. JavaScript submits the form after every keystroke. You are being followed. So what exactly is a form control? Well, firstly, form controls are content within a form container, but we already knew that. The big thing to keep in mind, though, is that form controls have no meaning outside of a form container element, even though your web browser may show them to you anyway. Each form control has two parts: a visible display that responds to user input and an invisible data field, sometimes called a variable, that is used to store data entered by the user. The note about unique field names is important. Just as in algebra we cannot have every variable named x, after all, how could we draw a line without y? We generally must make sure that each field has a unique variable name. Otherwise, the server will not necessarily know what to do with the data after it receives it. Finally, in addition to a data field, a control may also have a label so us humans know what it's asking for. But as the Google search page shows, that's not strictly necessary. After the user finishes the form, the data collected is encoded into a string of name-value pairs. The encoding is pretty straightforward. Each pair has the control name, then an equal sign, and then the data value. If there are multiple controls, then there is an ampersand to delimit the first pair from the rest of the name-value pairs. These then follow the same pattern for the rest of the controls on the form. For reasons having to do with logical completeness and system security, the data value is converted to an escaped format with no spaces, equal signs, apostrophes, ampersands, backslashes, slashes, etc. before being sent to the server. There are a whole bunch of form elements to choose from in HTML5. We can collect text in both short snippets and in longer passages that can span hundreds of pages. We can allow people to indicate their choices with checkboxes, radio buttons, scrolling lists, and drop-downs. We can provide buttons of various types, including buttons to submit and reset the form itself. We can select files for uploading or even hiding data that is never shown to the user. All of these things have been around pretty much from the beginning. Now in HTML5 we have lots of new controls for things like dates and times, sliders and progress bars, color pickers, and lots more. For a survey of all these, please refer to the book. The granddaddy of all form field elements is the input tag, which is used for any data that can be entered as text. The tag includes a type attribute that tells the browser what the control is supposed to look like and how it is supposed to behave. Types include text for basic text entry. That's what's assumed if you don't bother to specify a type. A password type that shows a bullet for each character type, obscuring them from prying eyes peeking over your shoulder. Various new HTML types that are designed to make it easier to enter search queries, email addresses, dates, etc. These come with special validation rules that don't allow the user to submit email addresses without the @ sign or dates that don't exist, etc. Submit and reset buttons have their own types, as does the before mentioned hidden text field. The possibilities go on and on. In addition to a type, each input element should have a name, which is required in order for the submission process to work properly. Given how every form control shares the same requirement, the name attribute is generally required for each of the other form elements that follow as well. Checkboxes and radio buttons work a bit differently from the other input types. They're grouped controls, where multiple controls are combined into a single unit. In the case of a checkbox, a group of options is shown to the user and the user can choose any or all of them. For radio buttons, the setup is pretty much the same, except the user can only choose one of the options shown. In both cases, the clickable boxes or radio buttons each have their own control, but they all share the same name. In the example shown, we have two radio buttons with the name choice. The name field is used like a category name for the whole group. This is the only exception to the each control has its own name rule. What gets stored in the data field then depends on the options clicked. Each option has a value, which does not have to match the text shown to the user. In fact, the human readable text option 1 and option 2 in this case is entirely optional, though I, for one, would never click on any choice without a label. Text areas are used for long passages of text and can include line breaks. We can configure them to fit any number of characters per line and any number of lines at a time. The initial contents between the text area start and end tags is the initial value of the text area before the user edits it. It's been that way since the beginning, but now in HTML5 there are other ways to show placeholder text for things like giving instructions to the user. The select and option elements work a lot like checkboxes and radio buttons, except they're more compact. Most often, they are used for drop-downs and scrolling menus that include too many options to permit us to use radio buttons or checkboxes. Like the form element does for form controls, the select element acts as a container for the option elements. Each option has a value that's active when the option is selected. The contents of an option element is exactly what is displayed to the user. If needed, we can use an opt group element to group the options together under the headings within the list. The label element is often neglected, especially by people who have been working with forms since the 1990s. It's used to formally associate a bit of text or an image with a form control. While it's possible to use plain text to label our controls, using a label element makes the page easier to style in CSS and easier for automated screen readers to interpret. There are two ways to go about it. The explicit association technique works for most controls. The technique matches the for attribute of the label element with the ID attribute of the form field. Note that the two attributes have to match exactly or it won't work. The other technique, implicit association, is a little bit more complicated, but fortunately is only needed for group controls like radio buttons and checkboxes. Please refer to the book to learn about how to do that. The last two elements are field set and legend, which together allow us to group a bunch of related fields and give the whole group a human readable name. You often see these used to break up long forms into sections. The subject of HTML forms is very rich, with lots of places out there to learn more. While the book does a wonderful job of summarizing everything in a few pages, there are other resources out there that are more interactive and comprehensive. In print form, the book Web Design in a Nutshell, also by Jennifer Robbins, is an excellent reference to HTML4, including all the traditional form elements. For HTML5 forms, you might want to try a website like wufoo.com's reference pages, which provide a live example of each form control for you to try out on your own. They also show which browsers do and don't support each control. Chapter 10 is very brief, more like a pep talk for HTML5 than a tutorial. The chapter recounts the origins of HTML5, which in 2004 looked to be a dead-end project with little hope of ever reaching the general public. Back then, everything was about XHTML, a stricter cousin of HTML based on XML technology. That was likely to become the new standard. However, XHTML was very hard for designers to understand and use. Basically, it was designed to make the web browser's job easier, but only at the expense of the sanity of the web designers that actually had to write code in it. Recognizing the problem, a small group of web technology leaders decided to jumpstart HTML5 and push it through standards organizations for certification. At one point, they even formed their own standards body to sponsor the work. Then, in 2010, HTML5 got a big boost when Steve Jobs announced that Adobe Flash would not be supported on the iPad or iPhone. This left people scrambling to figure out how to get movies and other media to play on the iPad. Fortunately, that was an area covered pretty well by HTML5, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. The chapter lists 6 reasons to use HTML5 over its predecessor, HTML4. The first is that it finally simplifies the doc type to something that designers could remember and use without much risk of a typo causing a white screen of death. The second reason is that it adds lots of new elements and other things that are more convenient for the designer. The third is that it purges from HTML a lot of cruft left over from the old days before CSS, JavaScript, Ajax, and other modern technologies. The fourth advantage of HTML5 is the addition of some new features for things like offline applications that make the whole mobile web possible. The fifth is the already mentioned media handling that Steve Jobs raved about. Lastly, it makes the user interface of the web so much richer by providing a standard canvas element on which programmers can draw whatever they like using JavaScript. The effect is that the page can look like just about anything the programmer wants it to. They just have to be willing to write the JavaScript code to draw what they've designed. With that little pep talk complete, we're now done with the HTML section of the book. Next we will move on to CSS, which is where more of the time of professional web designers is spent anyway. Thank you for following along with chapters 9 and 10 of Learning Web Design. See you later!